Okay, so good morning, afternoon. Where am I?
On
Jeez.
the nose.
So my name is Jo Palmer. I'm the founder and managing director of Pointer Remote. So we're a company that's passionate about supporting businesses and individuals from all over Australia, particularly in rural areas, to leverage remote work. So we support businesses to grow their team, and for individuals, we help them to re-enter the workforce or to upskill in remote. And we also work with communities themselves to support them to attract and retain population and to increase economic development in their area. Today, for our Ask Me Anything session, I'm joined by Sarah Nelson. So Sarah is passionate about creating legacy and advocating for Australian businesses and entrepreneurship, and has worked for government, private sector, small business and not-for-profits. So she's qualified with a BA in Media Communications, a graduate certificate in policy in the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and her experience includes the Chief Operating Officer for Sydney School of Entrepreneurship and the Head of Marketing at Barangaroo. She's also a very clever chook and has received lots of industry recognition for her work, including being named one of the 2017 Women's Agenda Public Sector Leader of the Year finalists, and as the 2015 B&T Women in Media Marketing Award winner. So thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. It is so exciting to have you here with us. Sarah and I met a couple of years ago when you were wearing the Chief Operating Officer hat at the Sydney School of Entrepreneurship, and we, I think, hit it off quite early stages, and it's been really interesting dealing with you with different hats on, and also with the new business that you now find yourself in. So do you want to give us a bit of a rundown on you and tell us about your career and your business journey to date, because you've had some really interesting experiences and clients.
Thank you. Lovely to meet everyone and to be here. I'll start at the beginning, and I did the Media and Communications degree, as you've heard. Applied for a marketing role and ended up as a buying assistant for Polo Ralph Lauren. So had this random job suddenly in fashion, which was awesome and sounds very glamorous, but actually gave me a really good commercial underpinning. So I spent my life in Excel, certainly not on runways or anything like that. And just working for someone like Ralph Lauren really showed me how brand could be absolutely everything and through absolutely everywhere in a business. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I felt really bad that I had this comms degree but didn't really do much with it. And so very diligently came back to Australia. I had been working in London for a year at the time. Came back to Australia, got into PR, which was great because I had some fantastic clients and was working at the very top. So with John Singleton and Katie Page and Jerry Harvey on Magic Millions, and launched a new cider with Mark Carnegie. So some really big Australian business personalities, but just found PR so frustrating that the work didn't equal the reward, but that stories which were so thoughtful and strategic and researched and backed with incredible photography, for whatever reason, be it an earthquake or political events, or the journalist just didn't, or the editor just didn't feel like running your story, the work would go to waste. So I found PR quite frustrating, but a very interesting world. And then ended up working in media and communications for the Department of Planning for a big congress that they were hosting for mayors of world cities with populations over 1 million people, and was just completely seduced by government, which is perhaps a strange thing to hear, but just that sense, that noble purpose of what government and departments could and should be doing for their citizens with taxpayers' money. It just got me hook, line and sinker, and so worked from there on in government. So from 2017 to 2018, when I left Sydney School of Entrepreneurship, so 11 years in state government in New South Wales. After a while working for the Department of Planning, I got wind of this cool new project called Barangaroo. And so went across there. And that was amazing because I got to see through the creation of a brand in really different phases. So initially from policy to a project. So the policy had to change the use of the land. It was an industrial docklands, and then that was going to be turned into a commercial, residential and recreational space, and to a physical place. So by the time I left Barangaroo, we were open and people were visiting this place, this new park on the foreshore of Sydney Harbour that hadn't been open for the last 150 years. And there was a big cultural component, because it was, you know, an Australian place, but also because of the naming. It was a bookend to Bennelong. So Barangaroo was the second wife of Bennelong. So a really, really lovely educational experience into the cultural aspects of place in Australia. And then with my husband's business, we got an opportunity to move to New York. So we went across there for a year and had a ball. Gone into volunteering there and helping him very much as an Australian startup, and distributed team. So he had his team in Sydney, Melbourne, China, New York and London. So I was really working with him on that, how you keep the culture going across multiple locations. And then came back to Sydney and still had an itch. I felt like my government career hadn't quite played out yet, and so was really lucky enough to land a job with the Department of Industry, who had just funded this new School of Entrepreneurship as part of the broader innovation policy agenda. And Sydney School of Entrepreneurship was is a partnership between 11 New South Wales universities and TAFE. But what was really great was it was, although backed by government funding, it was an independent not-for-profit. So that's where I picked up the not-for-profit skill set. And it was really tricky. It was brand new. And so I joined them as Director of Strategic Comms, but pretty quickly picked up operational responsibility. And built it with a fantastic CEO and a huge amount of partnership across startup and tertiary sectors to build that. But then quit because I felt like I had it all and it was great. But it was just really messy and exhausting, and I was completely depleted, and it just felt like work was getting everything, and financially, I felt like I was just bringing home enough for a nice holiday, but it wasn't really a meaningful salary, because most of it really, and this is speaking very honestly, went on stuff like, I'd get a taxi home because it was 20 minutes as opposed to catching the train, which was going to be 45 minutes to an hour. And I just wanted to be back with the kids, who I had admitted in that version of events, I had 2 kids along the way. And, your takeaway goes up, and I love cleaning. And that's a big, it sounds strange, but that's me tidying my home is like it's a caring act for me, but you're paying for a cleaner, and that's a lot of money, $30 an hour once a week for a couple of hours. It really should be better in your super than having it. So, I quit and went on this journey of figuring out how to make it all work, and that has ended up in legacy.
I love it. I guess those that are listening can then sort of see, well, one, I feel that we're kindred spirits, because although they've been very different roles, my all over the shopness of the last few years is quite similar to yours, and that throwing the kids in the mix and things there. But I think that what you bring to this conversation is a really genuine experience in a lot of different industries and a lot of different ways of working and organisation types. And so that's why I was really interested to have you come on today and to talk about this legacy piece. I suppose, do you want to give us a bit of a fill-in on, so Sarah Nelson Advisory, and what does this look like, this new thing that you were navigating? And then we can sort of talk about where that has sort of evolved from, and where that ties into what you had done previously.
Yeah, so I was working really, really closely with the CEO at Sydney School of Entrepreneurship and the CEOs at Barangaroo. and, executive director of Department of Planning, and even directly with, some pretty major business figures in PR. Didn't get to work directly with Ralph Lauren, but and I was always in a comms capacity, and I always felt really successful when I had that direct relationship and I could make proactive, advice and recommendations to the CEO, which I seemed to get an opportunity as through comms in speech writing or annual reports, board papers, that sort of thing. So in some ways, comms was a good Trojan horse for getting access to the strategy. But then I got really frustrated because I'd go back to my desk, having had this awesome strategic conversation and alignment with the CEO, and I'd go back to my desk and I couldn't quite continue that brand integration operationally because I was back just in comms. And through my political experience, I knew that all of the ministers and politicians, and I've now come to know that a lot of startups increasingly have chief of staff, as do big CEOs. So, heads of banks and insurance companies, those sorts of people. So it seemed to be that the more dynamic your role was and the more important you are, you would have a chief of staff. But then anybody else, like a founder or a SME owner, wouldn't have someone in the business, particularly at early stage, to just make things tidy and look for ways and synergies that you can organize everything around a statement and a set of values so that you've got that consistent culture. So I felt like there was a magic mix in that. And then also just having, had that sort of midlife crisis mode, I was like, well, what's my sweet spot? And I loved being a general manager and a chief operating officer. And I loved it for that access that it gave me to all aspects of the business. And I just reflected on all the situations where I'd been really frustrated that, marketing would say, well, we'd try to say something in marketing, but then development or HR would go and do something completely at odds. And then it would then come back to marketing and comms for you to clean up. So, I wanted to go in and be that chief of staff, general manager type role to people that perhaps couldn't afford to have that in-house full time.
Yeah. And I guess as well, like your time at Sydney School of Entrepreneurship, you were dealing with a lot of individuals and businesses and startups and things. And I guess you were seeing like, hang on, I get to like test my market and all the buzzwords that you do in a startup yourself, that you were actually getting to see that boots on the ground.
Yeah, which is an opportunity that I hadn't had when I was just in communications. And it's trickier with established organizations. So Sydney School of Entrepreneurship was awesome because we really had to, first of all, articulate what we were because no one really understood it. And then second of all, we really had to defend our position because we were given a lot of money, $25 million, to create something quite unusual, tertiary institutions collaborating rather than competing with each other, which was really strange at the time. And so there were lots of eyebrows raised. Everywhere we went, there were eyebrows raised. Like, who are you? What are you doing? Why do you get the money? I don't understand, what's in it for me. So we really, really, really had to have our house in order, and we had to have a perfectly defensible position. And we did that through having a really, really strong vision, and then the values, and then demonstrating our cause through absolutely everything that we did. So, for example, our tagline was that we're, Sydney in name only, statewide in operation, and global in ambition. And we backed that up with, for example, having making sure that there were 12 members, and we made sure that any kind of cohort intake, we would have a fair representation of all 12 students from all 12 institutions. We had really strict KPIs that our numbers were 70% of students could come from metropolitan areas, but 30% had to come from rural and regional areas to match that stat, which you cite, Joe, that, a third of Australia lives in areas outside of cities. So let's include them, and let's get the numbers to prove that we're including them and not just say that we're including them. And then we did that in really fun ways. So For example, we served, we could have just bought wine from the local bottler, but we made a point to serve the wine from Charles Sturt University. So we integrated those values not just through our student intake and our customers in any other business, but also in our procurement.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess that's probably a good segue into there, that where in order to sort of position yourselves, you had to be really clear on that vision and mission and where you were wanting to go. So talk me through this concept of legacy in regard to, say, a small business or someone that you come in as that sort of chief of staff thing. Talk me through how you, I suppose, put onus and really strong focus on what legacy is and why that's really important in that early stage or in a transformation stage for an older pre-existing business. But talk me through what that legacy piece and why, obviously over your very varied career and experience and stuff like that, is something that you've picked up on. So talk me through that.
Yeah, it's like an audit. That's the most simple way to explain it and to reduce it. So it's that discipline and that process for really going through the aspects of your business that you want to understand. And then from that audit, you can identify and resource to close any gaps or risks. And what I have been seeing, particularly from that comms background, is that business gaps tend to result in massive individual reputational risk to varying degrees of impact. If you're a publicly listed company, you'll see your share price go. To an SME, you might lose some funding from family or friends. You might just, it's avoidable. And you, particularly when it's you, if you're a sole trader, why would you you don't need to take that risk. And so for me, legacy is really like an umbrella term for identifying what are the components in your life. So if you are that executive at the top, or that, that person in command at the top, and who are the different teams? Your business is a team, your family is a team, your own health and well-being, your relationships are different teams. And what's that one way of understanding your obligations to all of those different teams? And what do you want to achieve? And then you just look at where the gaps are. So you might be doing really well in your business, kind of like what I was at SSE. I was doing really well in my career, but I didn't feel like I had the community team was just completely absent from my life. And so I was like, okay, well, that's, work's fine because I can start a business. Family's great. Community is where I need to focus. So I took a year off and I got on a couple of community committees. But now I've done another audit using my legacy framework. I'm like, okay, well, community is great and family is great, but work, I'm a bit underemployed at the moment. So how can I build work back up? So it's that constant audit and framework to figure out where the gaps are, so that as an individual, as a founder, as a small business owner, you're well, because it's that hot. And maybe this is a very female take, but it's I thought happy wife, happy life meant handbags and diamonds. And I've come to learn that it's that, centered sense of wellness and, if your cup is full, blah, blah, blah. It's all that stuff, but all that stuff is true. So knowing your bit, knowing that, you've audited your all obligations and responsibilities and you know that it's covered, has this lovely flow and effect of avoiding potentially massive and costly risk.
It's really interesting because me, by default, when prior to meeting you, when I thought of legacy, I think of old guy, edge of retirement, that's now pondering what they want the legacy of their business to be before they sell or before they hand over to the son who's there in a suit ready to go. Like that old school sort of that's just sort of what I pictured legacy. But I think that what's a really interesting, like what you say is really interesting, is actually it's almost forward planning. It's like you mentioned superannuation. It's like superannuation, but doing it nice and early so that you reap the benefits of your legacy at the end. But it's not something that you can pull out of a hat right at the end of your career, that it can be something that is your gauge. And like you said, that you're auditing the decisions that you make along your career or your family choices or your community choices and things as you go along. So I think that's a really interesting way of sort of looking at legacy as a yardstick, I guess.
I totally agree. So a couple of reflections, particularly on legacy was that sort of like pale, male and stale. Like legacy itself perhaps needs a rebrand. I mean, the next problem I come up with is legacy systems. Again, it's something like really clunky, something that you've really, legacy systems are like an IT problem that is just really annoying to solve. But we all know if you stop procrastinating and get in and do it, you will uncover a whole lot of job satisfaction and productivity. Like just do it. That's another thing that Sydney School of Entrepreneurship taught me, is that done is better than perfect. But I very literally found myself Googling like what to do with my life and how to have it all. And I needed a framework to sort of figure it all out and to fit it all in. And that's where I came up with this legacy worksheet and that process of what are your values, what are your teams and your obligations, where are the gaps, and then just looking at that all on a page. What is that feeling of what matters most to you? Because it's so, I mean, maybe this is a treadmill comment and it's interesting to see how it changes now with COVID, but it's so rare that you get that opportunity to you yourself stop and think about what you have, what your values are, and are they yours, or are they your parents, or are they your employers? And, have you got family values, and are they incongruous with your current employment values? And you can use that as a decision-making framework, right down to, I was having a conversation with my mother about toilet paper, and she's like, well, I'm just, I make a decision on cost. And I'm like, but the social enterprise of an Australian founder who gives a crap, like, come on. and we were talking offline before about finding more time in our really, really busy days. And every second is a decision. And if you can slowly gravitate towards what is more meaningful and what contributes to that whole self and that, holistic sense of accomplishment through every decision, not just success at work, but everything, then that's your proactive legacy, because you're consistent and then it's recognized and it becomes easier.
Mm. So if a business that when you're working with a business, like what's the sort of process that you get a business owner or an individual? So this doesn't have to only be for business owners, but for individuals really wanting to, again, having a look, doing some navel gazing and stuff. Like, how do you work through that process of firstly, like, honing in on what their legacy is and why is it important to their organization? Where do you sort of get off the ground with that?
There seem to be two different engagements. So either I'm working with an individual and it's very much their individual legacy, and work and business will be a part of that, or I'm engaged by the business in that kind of general manager, chief of staffy kind of role. But one of my favorite things to do is, I've always been best friends with finance teams, and I find a really good measure through that audit process is to have a look at your budget and have a look at, does your budget tell the same story as how you describe the priorities or the values of your business? And so you can use that as a really quick self-assessment tool. And you can go down to as granular a level of detail as you'd like. An example might be, and that you can also look at procurement, for example. So if you spend X and you say that we're all about gender equality, does 50% of your spend go to male-owned businesses as well as 50% of your spend going to female-owned businesses? Or does 92% of your spend go to male-owned businesses? Or if you're all about Australian business, does all of your spend go offshore? And it's just that audit process, and then you're looking for gaps, and then you'll just feel so much more for what's happening in your business. And then so you've totally reduced your margin for risk, And then also you're back in touch with your business, which is the most, once you understand your legacy, which is a little bit of homework, that worksheet that I mentioned, and a little bit of hard work and navel gazing. But then the content to use, in marketing speak, it should just flow and flow and flow, because suddenly everything is a story about you and your business, and my whining kelpie in the background, which is great for barbecue chat, which is good for team culture, that people are proud to work for you, or it's good for stakeholder chat, or if you're trying to pitch for funding, or it's good for case studies in grant applications, or that kind of thing. So that auditing process and digging down and really interrogating, is your business what you say it is how I tend to work with businesses of any size.
So what about going a step back from that for some people, it can be actually really challenging to work out what they want their legacy to be. So as far as even before auditing moving forward, to say, okay, are we working towards, are we reflecting what our legacy will be? What about if you're still like, I don't actually even know what mine is or what I want it to be? Have you got any hot tips on people that are sort of at that stage of the game?
That there is no answer. And I think COVID has shown this so, I was going to say beautifully, but I'm not quite sure, so tellingly, shall we say. There is no, we are living through an era where there is no rule book. It was tossed out a while ago, but we probably weren't paying attention. And it has categorically, is hundreds of kilometers back down the road as we're driving towards an unknown future now. So you are your own guardian, and it can be anything. So don't be worried about how long it takes to articulate that. It might be a word, it might be a statement. So when I was going through this personally, it did take me a couple of weeks and then a couple of months before I came up with my legacy statement as such. And then it changed. I added a word a couple of months later. And I very literally use it as a decision-making framework. So just start with that process of thinking about what your values are. And it might be, really simple, like kindness, creativity, and love. And that's fine. And then just map out what you have in your life. And it's not a career planning exercise. It's not what you were saying before about, you always thought legacy was to do with old white men putting their names on buildings. Every time I hear the phrase personal brand, I kind of cringe, because to me, it just feels so self-promotion. But in a way, this is you and yours only, and it will take the time that it takes. But hopefully my framework is something that helps. And then hopefully as you go through that auditing process time and again, it becomes more apparent. And then your super slush fund hopefully becomes really, really rich and layered.
So I'm assuming with lots of these things that this can also evolve. This doesn't have to be something that you set in 2020 with where you were at with life and with business and with all of those things. And okay, this is what I said my legacy is, so I've got to jam that square peg in a round hole to keep it like this. So am I right in assuming that this can evolve, and that it should be something that you almost look back at and say, is this still correct for me, or is this still right for me and what I'm wanting to do?
So I've been interviewing a number of different male and female Australian CEOs across a range of different industries. And the difference seems to be that when you've got, look, it doesn't have to remain verbatim. Of course, there's that, wordplay. But if you've got that sense of your contribution, what you would like it to be, in a kind way, not in a crazy ambitious, I'm going to be top, but just what's your take on what you'd like your contribution to be? That tends to, and I'm thinking of a couple of people that I've been speaking to, so at least 3 people, it tends to remain very similar.
Interesting. I feel like that's something that we have been working on at Pointer has been really, it's been an evolving beast, even sort of just working out what are the those company values and those things that are really important to us, and how does that translate into how we do business. But I feel like over a fair few iterations, we're feeling that we're a lot more comfortable with it and are making business decisions and partnerships decisions and things around that. And so I think that where you talked about what that almost, using it as a yardstick and using it as the way to audit the decisions that you're making, I think it's a really helpful tool for us in particular to lean back on.
So I've used the example of the audit, which could be across your business, and then I've used the little task of matching your budget to what you say your business is, and checking that. I think where you might be personally finding your values becoming a little bit clearer is, it's one thing to describe your values or to define your values and state them. It's a whole other task to actually list and define behaviours that can demonstrate to yourself, but particularly if you're managing others, of what behaviours demonstrate those values. And often that's the missing trick. And it's really trendy to have a purpose and a mission and values. Like, we care, but how? How do you care? For example, is arriving to a meeting at 3 minutes before the meeting, is that how you care? Or is always turning your video on so you can see others' faces, is that caring? Or, actually going that extra step to have your values, but then also define the behaviours that can live out those values. The other thing I love about values is that it makes giving feedback to other team members or on projects or campaigns much more objective, which is really, really good for building that rapport and culture.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess then with like the challenging times that we find ourselves in environmentally, with droughts and floods and fires, and health-wise in regards to COVID, and with the financial downturn that we're now experiencing, talk us through then why you think now, probably more than ever, like an organization's legacy is really just so important.
I think legacy, the words might change here and there and vision statements might be updated, but it really is that sense of having a course to stick to when change is just always relentlessly thrown at you. I started my career at a time where, we'd just had John Howard as Prime Minister, and he's been the only Prime Minister to serve a complete term since 2007. So this isn't yes, of course, droughts and, climate change and COVID, but change has been constant or becoming constant for a long time now. That's 13 years ago, at least. And so, and what I was saying before is you are the guardian. There is no one else. There is no rule book. There is nothing. This is all on you and your business. And so if you don't have that compass and if you don't have that framework, expecting other people to define your success is just like throwing resources and momentum and culture and commitment and staff and it's just throwing everything to the wind. So I think having that legacy perspective is really fiscally and financially responsible with your resources, and also emotionally and socially responsible that yourself and your teams understand where they work and why. And yeah, I think it's just it's a very prudent and constant way to operate in a very dynamic and challenging and kind of out of control environment.
Well, it's really interesting because in this new world we're finding ourselves in, at Pointer, we're seeing a lot more businesses that are like integrating remote work and flexibility into the way that they run their business. And what we're actually seeing is that a lot of these organizations are actually using how they run their business. So say like actually using the fact that they have employed people that live in a rural area or a bushfire affected area or something like that in a remote capacity, or that they've been able to set up their business in a far more hybrid model so that people are coming into the office some of the times and not working from anywhere other parts of the time. And regardless of what the product or service it is that they're selling, that businesses we're working with are actually using the way they work to market their product or service, even though it's not related to remote or drought or fire or those sorts of things. Do you think that that's something that we'll see more of? Like a big example is Atlassian announcing that literally all jobs work from anywhere forever, whatever, you can come into the office if you want to or not. And so they're obviously using that as an attraction and retention of talent piece. But that's actually got nothing. Well, they're probably not a great example because they use they're sort of building software that makes remote work very easy. But those sorts of things, like, do you think that how people are running their business now can be something that can be, I suppose, brought into their marketing and their comms, and that can be used as a way to grow business by how they're doing it rather than the product and service themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that that's even a question in a way, because the flip side is, would you not want to work somewhere that doesn't disclose or talk about or is proud of every aspect of their business? And an example of that is Ellen. I don't know if you've been following what's happening with the Ellen show in the US, but, you know, she's this very open, happy-go-lucky, big public character that has just been smashed by pretty sustained accusations of the most horrendous working environment and bullying and intimidation and, you know, racism and just the worst. So, so that's one case study from pop culture. Another one is, I was chatting with the former CEO of Westpac, and he said the best thing that we did for our talent was introducing, and we were one of the first to introduce paid maternity leave. So that whole movement of employer brands and employer of choice is becoming more and more important, because people are waking up to the fact that it's not work or life. It's not work-life balance. It's work-life integration. And legacy is that way that you know exactly what you stand for. And so you find work that suits your life across all aspects of your life. I'm certainly not, you know, trying to belittle the importance of cash flow and stimulation other than kids, et cetera, but everything is becoming more holistic, and that supply chain is becoming a huge consideration, which is like operationally in terms of legacy in a business, where you've got to be pretty flawless, because if you don't know any gaps, they'll be uncovered, they'll be called out by whistleblowers or social media or whatever. So it's that transparency is definitely a huge asset. And also we're just realizing that we're moving into portfolio careers, and we are becoming more entrepreneurial, and it's no longer just about the sole employer. And people do want people, employers do want people with community connections, and that, a healthy employee, because they have time to exercise and they've got meaningful relationships in their life, is more productive, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's so interesting. One of the questions that we've got here is that with our kids working so hard to stay in school right now, what was your motivation at 16, and how does that differ now? Do you think you were aware of like some form of Sarah Nelson legacy at age 16, or you're like, no, I'm drinking passion pop at the skate park when you're 16 and not really thinking about those sorts of things?
Was definitely drinking passion pop. And very happy to report that I married the skateboarder. So, and it's the trifecta, because I have always had, since my childhood, had a ridiculously deep connection to the bush and the land, and in particular, so now in my head, I've got this very, very, very strong visual of the sandstone at Maroota, which is a Hawkesbury region northwest of Sydney City. So there's so there was a strong, and I was very drawn to business, and I come from a family of strong women. So yeah, it's a lovely question. Thank you for the question, because I hadn't stopped. See, this is the legacy thing. You don't stop to think about this stuff, that your life is consistent and everything is layering. And, you know, particularly as a mum, when you might have days that you don't feel very productive, and maybe legacy is just that sort of way to pat yourself on the back and be like, you know what, I did one for the Australian team today, like, yay me. Which, yeah, I'm very happy to say it is broadly consistent from sandstone to marrying a skateboarder.
I'm so pleased. So I think
the champagne's improved though.
Yeah. If you can put passion pop in the champagne category.
Yeah, I've upgraded the sparkling to champagne.
I wanted to go back on, you talked about sort of almost three pillars in that, like work, life and community, and that you have over your career and life stages and things sort of consciously focused on areas, on the three sort of areas, and that, you know, you sometimes go a bit heavy on some and that you've got to top back up. When you sort of were feeling that like you needed to sort of do more things community wise, were you quite conscious of like your legacy piece being like a lens to sort of make those decisions about what you were doing as well community wise?
Yeah, and this was something that really came out of doing the Institute of Company Directors course. That I mean, I'm on 2 community committees, so I'm not legally a director of either. But you know, so taking a sort of career path as opposed to a legacy path, boards and fiduciary responsibilities is something that I'd love to step up into. And the company directors course very much emphasizes that the board, not as individuals. So when you're on a board, you're not an individual, you are the board collective. And the board is absolutely, buck stops here, responsible. And that's a huge responsibility. And so what do you want to take that risk on for? And so for me, it's got to be a whopper. It's got to be something beautiful that you very, very willingly give a huge amount of, or take a huge amount of risk and responsibility for. So I joined from City School of Entrepreneurship, just saw that changing notion of education and really loved that. So got more involved in my school's Parents and Friends Committee. And that obsession with the bush and the landscape, there was an opportunity that came up with the Centennial Parklands Community Consultation Committee. And so joined that. And so take my legacy, that's very much my, like internally, that's what I view as my contribution when I'm wearing these committee hats. Yeah,
that's so awesome. Well, look, as always, every time I end up talking to you, I sort of go into this spin of like, man, I really need to be like taking more time away from like doing the day-to-days of things and really sort of drilling back down into like the values and the purpose of business and those sorts of things. But if you had, say, 2 or 3 takeaway things that like could be action items for people watching this too. Again, like I said, it doesn't have to be people that are in business. It can be them having a look at this as an individual coming to it. But 2 or 3 things that are like action items, I think, to sort of go away and do almost as homework, or to get into some of that navel gazing that we talked about.
I'm just going to grab the puppy because she's chewing the speaker cable. Okay.
Oh, cute. Let's have a quick look. Hold it up.
So,
oh my God.
This is the Australian brand legacy. I had to get an Australian dog, my Kelpie.
I just had to take a photo of the stuff in there.
Okay, so homework. Individually, I've actually created a individual legacy worksheet which isn't a very sexy title. So homework number 1, if you come up with a sexier title, please share. Worksheet's not very sexy. Anyway, it's a series of prompts for how I think you can get to that legacy statement. So you just throw down what you think your values are. Hot tip is anything more than 3 is really hard to remember. So that would be tip number 1. So complete that individual legacy worksheet and stop at 3 values. Brainstorm more, but get to 3. And then just come up with that statement and be comfortable with what it is and feels like, and hang out with it for a while until you feel like you've got something that resonates and sticks. And to business owners, I would do the audit. So reverse engineer your budget, and does your budget say what you want your business to be and how you would pitch or describe your business is? And if there's any opposing budget lines, or like under-resourcing, for example, like if you say you're all about people, but you don't have any professional development or training budget, and just find the gaps and fill them.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Well, thank you. Mind spinning as per usual. I really appreciate your time. And I think that, well, for those that are watching, like, that would really agree, like, it's really interesting to sort of see how this can, you said it, it's not a work-life juggle or balance or things like these. It's an integration, and it's a blend. And I think it's a really interesting way of that your legacy then can be sort of your guide with what you do career-wise, how you run your business, how you participate in your community. So I really appreciate you, because I think sometimes that it doesn't get tied into a nice little bow like that. And for me, that's actually been a really big takeaway of this, is that actually that's, yeah, having that lens that you're casting all over all aspects of life is a really, really interesting way to think of things. So thank you so much for joining us. And we will put your contact details and everything with this video, as well as the non-sexy named worksheet. Again, we will look for
open for ideas.
That. But I really appreciate it. And where, if people are wanting to get in touch, where's the best place to find you?
Please email me, sarah@sarahnelson.com.au, or I'm often on LinkedIn. You can direct message me there, or Joe, happy for you to connect anyone with my mobile. I'd be very happy to answer any questions or step you through the yet to be finally named, the legacy worksheet, or any general questions that you have.
Wonderful. And before we wrap up, is there anyone that's on the call today that's got any questions for Sarah? No? Fabulous. Okie dokie. Wonderful. Thanks again, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.